Restoring Men in History. George Washington said this: if the freedom of speech is taken away, then dumb and silent we may be led like sheep to the slaughter. George Washington. We're going to look at a poll, and it's quite alarming about free speech, because as you know, as you move away from free speech and the freedom side, you move to the anti-freedom side, the totalitarian side over here, when you take away free speech. So let's take a look. Pew Research Center did this poll, and of course, it's the way you ask the questions. July 20th, 2023, most Americans, and this is surprising in light of what has occurred over the past few years, especially right in your faces, favor restrictions on false information, violent content online. Christopher St. Aubin and Jacob Liedtke, Pew Research Center. Most Americans say the U.S. government and technology companies should each take steps, to restrict false information. Now, who's going to determine? Let's stop here. Who do you want determining what information you get? Don't you want all the information you can possibly get if you want it and you want to go find it? We certainly don't want the federal government interfering with the First Amendment, your constitutional right. And who would define false information? Would that be, let's examine that as we go down. Remember, false information could just be information that goes against the super narrative of the government, against the big pharma narrative, against the military-industrial complex narrative, against the policies they want in the federal government to pass, or them being reelected, right? Power what? Sometimes, many times, power wants more power. So they would protect that by what? Censoring your speech. If you like this video and our mission, help, like, subscribe, share it, pass around. Thank you. All right. However, there's more support for tech companies moderating these types of content than for the federal government. Well, we don't want the federal government doing it at all, right? According to the new Pew Research survey, support for the U.S. government and tech companies restricting false information online has risen. Now, this is interesting, in recent years. Now, you would think, again, in light of all the information you've had, the Twitter files, Missouri versus Biden, remember what happened in that? We just did it. CDC, FBI directing Twitter and what they could say and not. You had the Twitter files, and you also had Missouri v. Biden, which the judge slapped the federal government pretty hard because they interfered with the First Amendment, your rights, your ability to speak and get information that affected you. Let's keep going. Support for both technology companies and the government taking steps to restrict false information online has grown in recent years. For example, the share of U.S. adults who say the federal government should restrict false information, get this, you ready, has risen. And this is pretty substantial. From 2018, they asked the same questions. That's what I like to hear. Same questions asked, and a change. Notice a change. From just 2018 to 2023, where did it go from? What to what? What percentage do you think out there listening? Do you have a guess? Take a guess. The share of U.S. adults who say the federal government should restrict false information has risen from blank to what in 2023? It went from 39% in 2018 to, get this, 55% in 2023. Thank goodness we have a republic, not a democracy, right? The increase in support comes amid public debates about how online content regulation and court cases that look at how tech companies moderate content on their platform. Now let's read the First Amendment. The First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech. So the federal government cannot abridge the freedom of speech. That means the agencies, the executive branch, the Congress, the Supreme Court, or of the press. So, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. All right? Or the right of the people peaceably to assemble. And notice how they shut that down too, right? So let's look. Let's go back to the piece now. That's the First Amendment. So we don't want the federal government abridging your freedom of speech, your rights, or of the press. We don't want them interfering in any way, or the agencies, the FBI, the CDC, or any of these executive branch agencies, right? And we can go in the unconstitutionality in a minute, or later. All right, let's do this. The increase in support comes amid public debates about online content regulation and court cases that look at how tech companies moderate content on their platforms. Additionally, tech companies have begun to remove some content restrictions. Remember all the restrictions that they had imposed in response to misinformation about the COVID-19 pandemic and 2020 election. Now look, let's stop here for a minute. COVID-19 pandemic, would you want all the information available for the health of your family, or would you want it restricted? If you thought there was something that could get your child healthier, would you want to know that or not? If you thought something could get your child healthier that was even less expensive, but it did not make big pharma money, would you want to know? Because do you remember and recall how much information was restricted? They had doctors that couldn't speak out against the vaccine. They couldn't speak out against the mask. So you had the freedom, anti-freedom side, right? The super narrative of the government was get the shot, get the jab. The super narrative of the government was wear the mask. And we found out all the misrepresentations of the federal government in that and the CDC about the mask and vaccines already. What if you couldn't have access to the VAERS, the self-reporting system of vaccine injuries? Do you not want that information? Don't you want the most information possible so that you can make good decisions for yourself and your family in regards to your health? First of all, the federal government's not supposed to be involved in your health. That was reserved for the states and the people, but that's another day. 2020 election. In a republic, it's important to know that your elections are free and fair. Would you want to know if they're not free and fair? You saw it shut down in front of you. Do you want election integrity and being able to discuss electric integrity and voter ID and why that's important? And where mail-in balloting is very susceptible to fraud. Do you want to have those discussions, and do you want to know that information? I want to know that information for sure. Secondly, constitutionally, the federal government can't interfere in that. They would be protecting themselves if they were in power, right? Or if the party that won in 2020 didn't want you knowing that there were some interesting things going on with the election. What if you couldn't see 2000 Mules, the movie, because that was determined false information? Don't you want to see that and make the decision for yourself? It's very important in a republic for you, the people. Who is the government created for? Who's the government created for? You, the people. We, the people. It's not created for them. It's created for you and your protections. Additionally, all right, that said, the amount of people, so election integrity, election fraud, COVID, you've seen all the misrepresentations by the federal government, right? Or the abuse of shutting down and censoring a different opinion by doctors, a different opinion by people who looked into election integrity. Don't we just need to know that information? Don't the people deserve to know there are fair, free elections in America? That said, the amount of people that have heard about the debates surrounding the role of government should play in regulating major tech companies has decreased. This is interesting too. In 2021, 51% of US adults said they'd heard at least a fair amount about this topic. Now, why aren't people hearing about this topic? Is that because, think about it, they tried to shut down election integrity, and they don't want this discussion either, right? Compared with 39% today. So less people getting the information already about the role government should play in regulating major technology companies. First of all, federal government needs to get out of the way of technology companies so you can have all the information and then you can make the decision, and that's constitutional. Federal government, we just read the First Amendment. What's it say? Shall not abridge the freedom of the press and the freedom of speech, right? Shall not abridge. Key takeaways: 65% of Americans support tech companies moderating false information. Again, who's determining false information? If something's at stake and you're up in the government and your buddies are making money and Big Pharma's making money and they're pushing a vaccine or pushing something, they're going to have an incentive to want their information to get out, but no negative information about that, right? They want to conceal negative information possibly, right? If they want to remain in power and they've done something wrong, do they want that out? So you need the access to make good decisions in voting and make good decisions for your family and your health. These shares have increased since 2018. This is the alarming fact, opinion here. Americans are even more supportive of tech companies, 71%, and the US government, 60%, restricting extremely violent content online. Look, they took Trump off Twitter, 71%, and the US government, 60%. That is a large percentage of people that are not supporting the First Amendment. Freedom. And we need to support freedom. We need the information to make good decisions. Democrats are more supportive than Republicans, which means we have to do a better job talking to Democrat voters. These are voters, not the party, not the uniparty. Than Republicans of tech companies and the US government restricting extremely violent content and false information online. Look, we don't want the government interfering with what tech companies want to do. And if tech companies want to have a bias, they can. We just don't want the federal government giving them a bias, right, and directing them. The partisan gap in support restricting false information has grown substantially since 2018. That's bad. This is really bad. So we need to reach out. So here's our action step. We need to reach out and talk to Democrats, talk to voters, that their free speech is so important to a republic and freedom. Freedom over the illusion of security. After what the federal government did, you would think this would not be occurring. But here's the poll. All right, let's go on. Many Americans say the U.S. government tech companies should restrict false information and violent crime online. All right, I think we covered that. Just over half of Americans, 55%, support the U.S. government taking steps to restrict false information online. Again, a third time we'll say it. We do not want the government determining what false information is. They could have an election coming up. People in power usually like to retain their power, right? They even like to usurp the state's power in the federal government, right? They've done that throughout history. So why would you ever? And here's another interesting poll. People don't trust the government as much as 3 years ago. This is a different poll, but here you have this. So there's a disconnect, and that happens on several times. People like their congressman but don't like Congress. So these polls are interesting. Means we need to do a better job with the freedom, talking about freedom and how important free speech is to you and to your family, to your children, to be able to get the proper information for your health, your welfare, and your happiness, right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Governments are created for you. U.S. adults are likely to say that freedom of information should be protected, even if it means false information can be published. 42%. This is scary. This is a really scary poll. We need all the information. In fact, I would make this argument. We need the government, the federal government, to release a lot more information, the JFK, and what's going on up there. We need more information, not less. We actually need the government to release a lot of those confidential reports to the public so we can make better decisions about what our government is doing. Government is created for you, the people. It's not created for them to have power, control, and more money. And you can trace, look, if their incentives are large billions of dollars, what happened during COVID? Who got the most affluent by shutting and pushing the narrative of the vaccine? Who made the most money on that? Big Pharma, right? Who made the most money of shutting down small businesses? Unsafe to go in a small business. Why would you trust this information at this point? Shutting down small business, but let's get everybody into Walmart and Target where you'll all be together. Does that make sense? No, it does not. What was the incentive there? Who was gaining by that? Follow the money. Follow the power. Follow the control. Trace it back to the money. Who's going to make money? Military industrial complex. Ukraine. Would they want to show a bad negative story about the war? Support for the government intervention has steadily risen since the first time we asked the question in 2018. And that's surprising, right? Because you would think it would have decreased support after all the misinformation provided by the federal government and all the censoring. In fact, the balance of opinion has tilted. 5 years ago, Americans were more inclined to prioritize freedom. Maybe this is a statement of society, of information over restricting false information. Look, again, you want some committee up there, the Ministry of Truth in 1984, determining what's false so they can gain more power and become totalitarian. This is dangerous. I don't know why you have this illusion of why some people, not you, why some people have an illusion of security, but you've seen what they did. You know it now. You've seen it. You can go back through history and see. In addition, the share of U.S. adults who say that tech companies should take steps to restrict false information has increased from 56 in 18 to 65%. Okay, well, listen. Private companies versus the federal government. The First Amendment protects you from what? The federal government. What private companies do, we just don't want the federal government telling private companies what to do. This would be a debate with the people. You have to educate. You have to talk to them and make them understand how important freedom is. Attitudes on moderating extremely violent content. Now let's move on to violent content online. This was the first time we asked American public views of moderating extremely violent content online. We found that Americans are somewhat more likely to favor restricting this type of content than false information. About 7 in 10, wow, 71% believe that tech companies should restrict violent content online. And 60% say the government should do so. Again, we don't want the government restricting what you need to see. What if the government has made an error and a mistake? What if Waco happens? You need to know about Waco's. What if it's the government that has made a mistake and they believe it will reflect for them on the upcoming election? Again, you do not want the government in a republic controlling your information that you receive to make good votes. Remember the Hunter Biden story, which the FBI shut down, and we know that now, Missouri versus Biden, and we know it from the Twitter files? Clearly breaking the First Amendment and a threat to a free society and a threat to your constitutional right of the First Amendment and the Bill of Rights. Partisan difference. Democrats have become much more supportive than Republicans of government restricting false information online. Again, these are the voters, not the uniparty. Democrats and Democratic leaning independents, this is scary, are much more likely than Republicans and Republican leaners to support the U.S. government taking steps to restrict false information online. So we have a lot of work to do. We have to really reach out to these good Americans and tell them about freedom and talk about how important freedom is and how it gives you choices for you to make the best choices in your life, for you to pursue happiness, for you to protect your property. You need the information. 70% versus 39%. That is an enormous move. Scary. There was virtually no difference between the parties in 2018. But what also does this say? That the share of Democrats who support government intervention has grown from 40% in 18 to 70 in 23. Could that be the Marxist indoctrination centers, the schools, the education centers, the universities, the media, Hollywood? Certainly. They've become more and more left and more totalitarian and anti-freedom. There's a similar gap between the shares of Democrats and Republicans who say technology companies should restrict false information online. All right. What else do we want to say about this? What else could have turned Democrats more away from freedom? Their party, top, has gone more away from freedom, right? And more towards socialism and communism. So that makes sense, right? China, totalitarian societies want to restrict freedom of speech, censor people because they want that government narrative so they can get away with more, right? And control people. But remember the incentives. Who's making the money? Follow the money. Who's gaining power? Who's getting control over your life? Smart cities are dangerous, right? But we're not going to get into that here. There's a similar gap between the shares of Democrats and Republicans who say technology companies should restrict false information online. Okay, well, listen, if a technology company wants to have a bias or a newspaper wants to have a bias, we've had that since the beginning. So we just don't want the federal government interfering and directing any of these tech companies where you get your information from, or shutting down certain individuals and coming up with a list, putting you on a list to shut down your free speech. A large majority of Democrats and Democratic leaners, 81%, wow, 81% of Democrats and Democrat leaning support technology companies taking such steps, while about half Republicans, 48, say the same. So we have to do a much better job, gentlemen, of educating the people and talking to them. We need to move this over. This is our job. This is our mission. Men have a purpose. We need to move this over to the freedom side and move more Democrats to the freedom side. Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents are much more likely than Republican and Republican leaners to support U.S. government taking steps to restrict false information online. Again, why would you trust the federal government, and why would you want to be working against yourself and your rights in the Constitution, which protects you? 70% to 39%. Wow. Virtually, there was no difference between the parties in 2018, but the share of Democrats who support government intervention has grown from 40% to 70. That's 30 points. That's amazing. That they're willing to give up their freedom for the illusion of whatever they think it is. Do they think it's the illusion of security? While the share of Republicans who hold this view hasn't changed much. Well, that's good. Voters, these are voters, not the Uniparty up in Washington. There's a similar gap between the shares of Democrats and Republicans who say technology companies should restrict false information online. Okay, that's okay. You can have a bias as a media company. You can have a bias as a tech company. So if you wish to restrict some speech as a tech company, that's fine. We don't want the federal government rewarding them, incentivizing them, or telling them what to do in any way, or threatening them. right? We don't want tech threatened by the government. Even if they agree with it, then it gives them a big out. Large majority of Democrats and Democrat leaners, 81%, 81% of Democrats and Democratic leaners support technology companies taking such steps. It's amazing that they don't want the information to make decisions for themselves. Or maybe it's not. Maybe they like big government making the decisions and giving them the information. I guess that's what they like. They like having their information restricted. Well, about half Republicans say the same. You want the information to be able to think through it and evaluate and make your own decisions, right? The share of Democrats who support technology companies taking the steps has also increased steadily since 2018. The partisan gaps persist when it comes to restricting extremely violent content online. Democrats are more likely than Republicans to say that the U.S. government, 71 versus 48% respectively, and tech companies, 83 to 61, should take steps to restrict violent content online, even if it limits freedom of information. Well, what if it's the government doing it, like at Waco? You don't want that information? Do you not want to know what your government's doing if they're doing it? We need to know all the information. And again, federal government has no business in it. We read the First Amendment. So that's dangerous. That moves you to tyranny and totalitarians. Over older Americans, more likely than younger, support restricting extremely violent content online. Extremely violent, okay? U.S. adults age 50 or older are more likely than younger adults to say that both technology companies, 68 versus 62, and the government, 58 versus 52, should take steps to restrict false information online. That's just terrible. That's atrocious. We need the information, and we definitely don't want the government to continue doing what they've been doing, restricting information, COVID, vaccines, etc., mask. We want all the knowledge to be able to make decisions for our businesses, our creative endeavors, our health, our families, and pursue happiness and pursue property with all the information available. We do not want the government restricting it, go against their narrative, or creating narratives and sending us the information they want us to know to make themselves look good, to make you reelect them, right, for power, or help their buddies in certain company endeavors, right? Green climate change companies, right? However, the shares of younger adults who say they support tech companies and government restricting false information have increased substantially. So younger adults have increased substantially since 18 by 14 and 19% points. So that's not good either, right? These are not good trends. There are similar divides when it comes to restricting violent crime online. 3/4 of Americans age 50 and older support tech companies restricting violent crime content online. 66% support the U.S. government doing so. This compares with 69 and 54 respectively among younger adults. So listen, how do we want to wrap this up? You can move to the freedom side or the totalitarian side. Do you believe in yourself, and do you believe in your decision-making skills, and do you want the knowledge and information to make the best decisions for yourself and your family and your endeavors? Or do you want the government sending you what information they think you need based on what they're trying to accomplish for themselves, their policies? That was not American principle. The American principle was we the people govern, not them. That we the people can look at the information and decide for ourselves what's best for this country, not you guys. And that we protect ourselves back. We actually need to restrain the federal government like the founders wanted to do, and which they did do when they ratified the Constitution. It was a restrained federal government. That's why they wrote the First Amendment in, to restrain the federal government and keep them out of your ability to have free speech and disagree with your federal government and have debate and argument. And here's the other thing about violence and speech and how it goes together. So here's the thing. Let's wrap it up. You can be for freedom or anti-freedom. I guess there's other choices. If you don't let people speak, they'll either become demoralized or result to worse acts, and we don't want that. We want peaceful truth and ideas to win the day. We're for peace, so we want truth, and we believe it will resonate with Americans. But to have the truth out there, you need to be able to state it. False information can be shut down if it disagrees with the government narrative or the corporate narrative or their combination and collusion, right? Or the globalist narrative or big pharma narrative or military establishment narrative. So we want all the information so that certain factions cannot shut down what they want us to do. In other words, what they want us to buy, what they want to sell. Money, power, control. Follow the money, and you see these narratives. What was the narrative during COVID? Get the vaccine. Why? Big Pharma was making a lot of money, right? Now it was Ukraine. Why? Military industrial complex has their turn. They get to make a lot of money, right? What's next? So we want all the information so we can make good decisions. We have the truth. We will win with the truth, but it has to be able to get out there. So we do not want the federal government infringing upon freedom of the press or freedom of your speech. Thank you. If you like this video, please hit like, comment, subscribe.